this side event of the Finance for Development Forum, and thanks for showing up. It's a struggle to get people attending in real events, in-person events. So I'm very happy that we have a good attendance in this virtual event. Thank you for coming. My name's Andrei Kuleshov. I will be moderating. I'm a Chief of Strategy of the Common Fund for Commodities. And this is a side event on the public-private investments for sustainable transformation of agricultural commodity sector and the CFC's own agricultural commodity transformation funds. So I understand it's a very busy conference going on in Sevilla, and everybody has time pressures and so on. So I would like, without wasting any more time, to invite my colleague, Mr. Nikolaus Krome, the Chief Operations Officer of the Common Fund for Commodities, to get us started with his opening remark. Nikolaus.
Yeah, thank you. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, from wherever you have logged on. On behalf of the Common Fund for Commodities, welcome to the side event of the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development in Sevilla or online. So this webinar, Andreas put, spotlights the Agricultural Commodity Transformation Fund and the role of public-private investment for sustainable transformation and development of the agricultural commodity sector. As many of you know, the ACT Fund was launched to mobilize blended finance and to accelerate investment into sustainable commodity value chains in developing countries. Our aim is to move beyond business as usual by backing enterprises that integrate climate resilience, social inclusion, and nature positive outcomes, especially in agriculture and land use. Technical assistance is also a central component of the ACT Fund structure, ensuring that investments are not only financially sound, but also institutionally, socially, and environmentally effective. So today's session is meant to give you an insight to what we're planning to do, why, and to give you a practical example of how this can be achieved. So we're honored to be joined by a truly outstanding lineup of speakers to set the tone. We have Lisa Sachs, Director of the Columbia Center on Sustainable Investment. She will deliver our keynote address. Lisa is globally recognized for her work on responsible investment in the extractive industries and sustainable development. She has advised governments, international organizations on aligning private sector investments with long-term development goals. And she has also been a trusted voice in debates on how to ensure that natural resources benefit many and not just the few. Following Lisa, we were meant to have the director of the ACT Fund, Michael Vandenberg, to give us a first-hand overview of the fund. Michael unfortunately cannot join us here today, so I'll be jumping in. For those new to the ACT Fund, this introduction will be an excellent opportunity to learn how we want to structure innovative financing partnerships. And we hope that this will be interesting enough for one or the other to get in touch with us at a later stage to dig deeper in what we have to offer. We will then hear from Fernando Russo, who will speak about regenerative agriculture, not as a trend, but as a system-changing approach that sits at the heart of the ACT Fund's mission. Fernando is a farmer, investor, but above all, I hasten to say he is a visionary. He has worked across Latin America to restore degraded soils and revive community-centered farming systems. And his voice brings together science, practice, and a deep respect for land and people. And I'm personally very glad to have him with us. Fernando helped us a lot during the conceptual stage of ACT Fund development. And from there, we will turn to the crucial enabler of sustainable investment, that's technical assistance. And Melanie Machingavuta from TechnoServe will highlight why TA is not an optional extra, but an essential part of making sure capital delivers results on the ground. Melanie has extensive experience working across Africa, Latin America, helping SMEs grow through hands-on business advisory, market access, and financial planning. And she has led initiatives that bring the last mile between financing solutions and rural entrepreneurs who need them most. As I mentioned earlier, TA is also an integral pillar of ACT's operational model. Finally, we'll hear from the perspective that matters most, and that's the investee. we have Dominikus Kollenberg, founder and CEO of Organic Africa. He joined us to share what it means to run a mission-driven business that has received investment from the CFC and actually technical support from the CASA program, which is run under the management of Melanie. Dominikus is not only a social entrepreneur, but also a pioneer in ethical supply chains from baobab to moringa to essential oils. His work creates income for thousands of smallholder farmers in Zimbabwe and at the same time preserves biodiversity and traditional knowledge. And we'll close with a short Q&A session where we will try to get all those questions answered that you are invited to post in the chat throughout the event. Yeah, thank you once again for joining us. We hope that this session provides not only food for thought, but also concrete ideas for action. And yeah, Andre, handing back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikolaus. And indeed, we have a distinguished panel of speakers today. And it is now my pleasure to invite Dr. Lisa Sachs to tell us about the failures of the global financial architecture that leaves the small and medium enterprises and the primary producers underserved. Lisa, please go ahead. Oh, and one more thing to everyone in this virtual meeting room, please do not hesitate to post your questions in the chat box. I will be monitoring the chat box, and we will try to answer some of the questions in writing and some of the questions by voice. Thank you so much. Lisa, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Andre, for inviting me to join you. I am in Seville on the sidelines of the Financing for Development conference, but I'm truly especially grateful to be with you for this discussion because in all of my work, more than 16 years directing the Columbia Center on Sustainable Investment, the agricultural sector and the commodity value chains really have been at the heart of the sustainable development challenge and are at the intersection of some of the world's most pressing challenges, but also the most important opportunities, and therefore, to my mind, of the greatest urgency to address the persistent challenges of underfinance. And so I'm really delighted to join you and especially excited about the new fund, which is so sorely needed. Just to say what I think everyone in this call already knows, but the reason that I think that this sector, the commodity sector, is so central to our global challenges is because it is central to livelihoods. It is so deeply connected to climate outcomes, both in terms of its vulnerability, but also in terms of its role in solutions. Of course, it's core to our food security, to rural development. So it is core to the development challenge, and yet it remains persistently and deeply underfinanced. And the financing that it does receive, to my mind, is not consistent with the long-term transformational needs or goals. So first of all, just to say in that context that the fund is really exciting and really needed, not only to address this financing gap, but also recognizing the increasingly critical role and potential of catalytic and blended finance, which can leverage core finance many times. So it's really exciting, and it's a vital contribution to this underfinanced sector. What I had hoped to do, thanks to Andre's incredibly kind invitation, is to situate the fund and the conversation in what I see to be at least two structural challenges that explain the persistent financing gap in agricultural transformation, and that I am committed to persistently working to address alongside the launch of the fund, because I think that it's that they are really decisive to scaling adequate finance. And that one is the lack of investment strategies and financing frameworks for food system transformations and for land use transformations, actually more generally. And the other is the high cost of capital for emerging markets that is, I think, under-discussed even here in Seville, just how structurally flawed our global financial system is that makes the financing of capital or the access to capital in emerging markets and in developing economies so much more expensive than in developed countries. So I will maybe say a word about that, because I see these as two very solvable challenges. So just first to say on investment strategies and financing frameworks, because I see this as a basic starting point for all of the transformations we're trying to achieve, which is that we generally have consensus around the transformations that are needed, including in food systems. But many countries still lack, in part because our global systems don't encourage or support the development of roadmaps to make transformations both investable and integrated. In general, I think the frameworks or the roadmaps that are needed should include 3 components, and I don't see this yet, at least widely adopted in the agricultural sector. But if others have good examples, I would warmly welcome it. But to my mind, the 3 components of robust investment strategies are include technical, institutional, and financing components. So one is a technical understanding of the transformation. So what are the actual what's the scientific basis for the transformation? What are the practices, the regenerative practices? What are new agricultural practices that not only build resilience but enhance food security and can contribute to climate change mitigation by enhancing the sinks of land use and so on? And what are new technologies that enable that, of which there are many that are rapidly developing but not widely deployed? So how can we use better digital infrastructure, for instance, soil monitors or the rapid crop diagnoses and so on, and infrastructure upgrades for irrigation and so on, that should be part of the transformation. That's the technological roadmap. The second is the institutional framework across ministries and level of governments and sectors that are necessary to create an integrated transformation. And what are the corresponding policies that are not only necessary for the transformation, but that are enabling of finance and enabling of private finance in particular, but really of public finance in general, as I'll describe. And then finally, the financing strategy, costing the investment strategy. What does a food transformation cost in a particular country? I haven't seen a robust costing of what it actually would look like to achieve the full transformation across the priority interventions, and that assigns responsibilities and in terms of public and private finance and the instruments and the proper financing mechanisms that would be used to enable that. So without that roadmap, I think we end up both with woeful underinvestment and then a fragmented finance landscape. And so to me, this is one fundamental component, which is that both enabling the mobilization of resources and then ensuring the efficacy or the most effective deployment of available resources really depends on and should be aligned with a coherent transformation roadmap at the national level. But we could even benefit from some global frameworks to support that at the national level. The second challenge, and one of the most persistent structural constraints, both to food systems transformation and to financing sustainable development more broadly, is the systematically high cost of capital facing emerging markets and developing countries. Just to underscore what, again, everybody probably knows, is that the challenge is not the lack of available financing globally. We have plenty in global savings each year. The issue is where that capital flows, and that it doesn't flow to where it's most needed, or that when it does at paltry scales, it comes at terms that make the transformational investments impossible, especially for developing countries. And the cost of capital, which is whether it's debt or equity, really determines the viability of long-term investments. I think the cost of capital is particularly important for food system transformations because much of the investments that are needed should be publicly financed to enable and to and to enhance the contributions of SME financing and what catalytic and critical funds like the ACT fund can achieve. It should be on top of real adequate public finance of the agricultural and food systems. The reason that in general food systems require public finance are that it, unlike, for instance, infrastructure that has an obvious revenue stream attached to it, in general, the returns to critical investments in food systems are over long time horizons. The benefits are more diffuse in terms of an obvious, one generated revenue stream to an operator, for instance. The returns the large returns can be social or environmental rather than directly financial. It requires coordination across many sectors, agriculture and environment and health and education, which the private sector is not well suited to do for all of those reasons. When we say that the cost of capital is high, what we mean by that, of course, is that the interest rates that governments have to, or investors actually, both the public and private, have to pay to access financing for projects or for public spending in developing countries, whether that's borrowing through debt or attracting investment through equity, is high. And in developing and emerging economies, the cost of capital, again, both for sovereigns and for private investors operating these economies, is orders of magnitude higher than in high-income countries. That is, again, not only so important when we're talking about countries' ability to borrow affordably for long-term public finance, but it is also especially problematic for investments that have high upfront costs and then returns over a longer term, because the high cost of capital makes capital-intensive upfront investments especially costly or prohibitively costly in many cases. And in food sector transformations, irrigation infrastructure, storage infrastructure, many of these projects are capital-intensive upfront capital costs that are therefore specifically affected by high borrowing costs. And then again, just to underscore how this is important, it is not only undermines private investors' ability to access funding, but for sovereigns, this is the only way in which sovereigns, especially in developing countries, can finance their public investments, because until they can invest in their own development, domestic resource mobilization is not sufficient to be able to finance these critical public investments. So the only ability to finance depends on the ability to borrow. So when the cost of capital is high, the borrowing becomes extremely expensive. Fewer investments get made. Those that do are more expensive and more limited, and so on. So to my view, this is really one of the most important and under-addressed structural constraints for investment. Just to very quickly share some of the interrelated factors, I think, that contribute to the high cost of capital, and I won't belabor this point, but I think it's really important to at least be aware. One that I have been very deeply looking at are the credit rating methodologies that really should be better understood for the effect they have for developing countries, and a bit for their perversity and how oddly misaligned they are with what actually needs to be financed. So we have 3 credit rating agencies that dominate the market: S&P, Fitch, and Moody's, and they assign countries a credit rating, a sovereign risk rating, basically one rating that is determinative of not only of both the cost of accessing capital, but also the willingness of investors to even invest in their markets. What is incredible, for reasons I'll say in a moment, is that not a single low-income country, not one single low-income country, is deemed to be creditworthy by these 3 credit rating agencies. And many institutional investors are prohibited by mandate from investing in markets that are sub-investment grade. So they just cannot invest directly in emerging markets or in developing, or I should say in low-income countries, or in any country that is sub-investment grade. The reason that not a single low-income country gets an investment credit rating is that right now, the main determinant of credit ratings is the GDP per capita of a country, both explicitly in that the GDP per capita is an explicit metric for assessing risk, which, by the way, just to say that the assessment of risk is in principle meant to be an assessment of the ability of a country to repay its debt. So it's mainly linked to GDP per capita, both explicitly and also implicitly, because it includes subjective assessments of institutional strength and so on. So basically, the rating agencies that are assessing a government's ability to repay are saying, if you're poor, it means your institutions are not weak and you're not going to be able to repay. It also includes a number of other factors, both explicitly and implicitly, that if we were trying to solve problems are addressable by the financial system, like the fact that developing countries, unlike developed countries, have to borrow in foreign currency. So they have currency risk and they don't have access to currency swaps. They don't have a fiscal safety net institutionally, which developed countries do. Developed countries also can print money or take money from their central banks if they have a liquidity crisis, and developing countries can't. These are all solvable problems by the international financial structure if we were serious about solving them. These are exacerbated by other aspects, just to say, of the international financial system, like the fact that the IMF tells countries, if you are poor and you have some debt, you should not borrow anymore and you should cut spending, which is, of course, the exact wrong advice for a country that needs to be borrowing to fund its long-term development. And both the credit ratings and these debt sustainability frameworks that the IMF use conflate two fundamentally different concepts. One is solvency, the ability to repay a debt over the long term, and liquidity, which is the ability to have cash on hand to repay. These emerging markets, the developing countries, and this is relevant for the investors in the ACT fund, are the fastest growing countries on the planet, the emerging markets. They are the fastest growing countries. They're growing many times faster than developed countries. And of course, with even more investment, they could really fulfill that growth potential. So if they were borrowing affordably over the long term, that is the best investment for investors to make a high return. But instead, because of the cost of capital is so high, the financing is short-term, just for 5-year or 10-year loans at very high rates. And so countries that have long growth or high growth prospects over a medium term, in 5 or 10 years, they don't have the cash on hand to repay. That's a liquidity crisis. It's not a solvency crisis. But that then, so they default, the credit rating agencies downgrade them, the IMF says, see, you shouldn't be borrowing, and so on. So we have a broken system that doesn't recognize the long-term returns, societal and financial, economic returns of long-term finance. And the food systems and the agricultural system and land use in general are one of the most affected sectors because of the long-term public financing that's needed. One other just small critique of the financial architecture, because it'll be relevant for the ACT fund and for blended finance, which is that particularly when public finance is inadequate, but even in general, the idea of catalytic and blended finance is very valuable. It's considering how concessional finance can be used to crowd in private finance, and by de-risking investments, being willing to take first losses and so on. Which, by the way, just to say, the data suggests that the risks of many of these investments in general across all types of development investments are much lower than the ratings or the risk perceptions would have one believe. So those who are taking first loss risk are actually reporting that the returns are higher than the market perceives. But in any event, these catalytic funds are very valuable. But we still have regulatory frameworks that don't recognize the de-risking role of these blended vehicles. And so the the prudential regulations still often require financial institutions to hold capital as if an investment in a blended capacity were still high risk. That is another piece that needs to be changed. So I will maybe stop there and just to say that alongside the absolutely vital and wonderful and critically important direct investing in the in SMEs in particular, and in SMEs in the food and agricultural sector in particular, because of their absolute role at the center of the Sustainable Development Challenge and how inaccessible other forms of affordable finance are to those critical actors. I will be persistently working alongside trying to address these larger structural constraints that not only are a challenge for private investors investing in these very valuable and viable projects, but that limit the ability of countries to invest in the foundational public investments that would be enabling of the broader transformations and growth that are absolutely possible and necessary. So with that, Andre, let me thank you again for letting me share some of this context. I'm really so delighted to follow and to support the work that you're doing and excited to work along with you in these next phases.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for these opening remarks and for the keynote address about the need for the roadmaps, I believe, for the developments of finance for transformative agriculture and the need to make financing available by addressing the structural challenges. And indeed, we will have a few more words later today from Igor Zelizetsky regarding the problem of credit ratings and the financing, the billions that cannot be accessed due to institutional constraints and the failures of the traditional financing system. So, speaking about the ACT Fund, I now have the pleasure of inviting Nikolaus Kromme, the Chief Operations Officer, to tell us about the substance of the ACT Fund. We have the honor of having lost our original presenter, Michael van den Berg, because he was called to high-level segments of the events to moderate a session of the heads of state and ministers. So Nikolaus standing in for Michael. Nikolaus, please go ahead, introduce us the ACT Fund. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again. Thank you for the floor. There should be some slides. If you can show them up. Yeah, as mentioned, yeah, I'm stepping into the big shoes on our fund of our ACT Fund director, Michael van den Berg, and within the time slot that I have been allocated, I will give you an introduction and an overview on the Agricultural Commodity Transformation Fund. Yeah, if you just go to the next slide already. So before we go right in, let me briefly introduce to you the Common Fund for Commodities, who has developed the ACT Fund from scratch and who will own the general partner of the fund and will also own and staff the ACT Fund manager and will also be an investor. So we do play a role. The CFC is an international financial institution dedicated towards agricultural commodities. We have been established under the auspices of the United Nations, UNCTAD to be precise, in the late 80s. Today, we have 101 member countries and operate out of our offices in Amsterdam. Our mandate is to improve the livelihood and alleviate poverty of smallholder commodity producers, right at the top end of the commodity value chains. And while our operational toolbox initially consisted of development and implementation of technical assistance projects, we did move towards impact investing as of 2013. And our current toolbox to meet our mandate consists of loan finance products, which are tailored to small and medium-sized enterprises, which are active in agri-value chains. And we do have a heavy emphasis on trade finance. So in total, actually, since we started operations in the late 80s, we have made close to 600 interventions in any commodity value chain that you can think of. I think we once published a book that was called From Sorghum to Shrimp. Yeah, so that means that. If you move to the next slide. Yeah, on this slide, you can see what we have been doing since 2013. Everything we do is related to agriculture and forestry. So we are a direct agri-investor with a current loan book of around $40 million, ticket size between 300K and $2 million spread over currently, I think, 35 investees. We are also invested as a limited partner in several agri-themed investment funds, where we take an active role. That can be ICs or impact committees, or technical advisory committees. Yeah, and we make use of our huge network and experience that we have accumulated over 30 years in agriculture-related technical assistance, in that we are a service provider to agri-impact funds, and we manage their technical assistance facilities. And right below, we recently have begun to develop blended finance structures ourselves. So next to the ACT Fund, you can also see the logo of the Central African Forestry Initiative, for which we are currently developing a large private sector financing program. And you can also see the FCDO logo, with whom we are busy setting up a small fund to offer loan finance to agribusinesses with a high risk profile. So if we move to the next slide. Yeah. So all we have learned from this and all we know in the CFC is being fed into the ACT Fund. Yeah? Let me start to explain this slide from the center. ACT Fund targets SMEs. And here you can see why. The SMEs are, in our view, the drivers and the engines and the center of commodity value chains. Yeah? They have access to markets, which provides them with delivery contracts and also with valuable market information when they go to fairs, for example. They can take this demand and this information, and that information is basically what commodity, what quality, when, how much, to millions of farmers in their countries from which they buy the raw material as the basis for their end product. And since these are all very local actors, they also have the means to organize an efficient supply chain with these farmers. And also they do that in an environment that is at times opaque, with rules that an outsider does not always fully understand. Yeah? And in addition to that, they SMEs process, and they process in the country where the raw material is being produced, and they create jobs and they pay tax. So ACT Fund, on the left side, you see the ACT Fund and the planned interventions. ACT seeks to collect $100 million in investment capital. This will go predominantly into trade finance and working capital for those SMEs. We plan to allocate around 75% to these two products, because that is really what we at CFC, what we're good at, and this is actually what the SMEs are asking for. The ticket sizes will be above those that we have at the CFC, roughly targeting $2 to $5 million. So there will be complementarity and not competition. And like we do at CFC, CAPEX loans will be limited to those investees that have developed a good track record within an earlier trade finance deal, and that substantially mitigates risk. And equity investments will only be made in an exceptional case when the opportunity arises. Yeah, and since trade finance has a fast turnaround, we plan to reach up to 70 SMEs during the 10-year lifetime of the fund. In addition, below the investment capital, you see that ACT seeks to collect $10 million for its technical assistance facility. This is going to be for interventions to support the sustainability of the SME itself. Sometimes they need help. SMEs are sometimes very shaky, but also to support the smallholder farmer network of these businesses with a focus on regenerative agriculture practices to increase smallholder resilience and to improve the smallholder livelihoods. And on the right side, you can see our impact targets. Because we deal with such a high number of SMEs, we expect that this will lead to a high number of farmers that we will reach, and also to substantial job creation. And on the environmental side, we project to sequester 1.6 million tons of carbon. And that is mostly through increasing organic matter in soils of smallholder farms, and also through planting trees. And this planting trees not for itself, but as part of transformed farming systems with increased resilience and higher productivity. Right, next slide, please. Yeah, so how do we want to structure ACT, and how can we attract investors? In all honesty, if an investor is after a high financial return, ACT fund might not be the right address. If an investor is looking for capital preservation in an agri-risk context and willing to settle with some modest financial return, but wants to generate impact, then we are definitely the right address. The ideal capital stack that you see here, we would like to build, has 3 classes with different returns. The A stack here consists of senior notes, which will receive a coupon payment. The B mezzanine stack will have a targeted IRR of around 7%. And the C stack is a first loss portion, which will be targeting capital preservation within our financial model projects an IRR of 2%. So CFC has already committed $20 million for this first loss tranche. And this substantially de-risks investments in the other 2 stacks. And we are happy to announce that we are in a very advanced negotiation state with a cornerstone investor that finds our proposition attractive enough to enter in one of the higher stacks. Okay, if we move to the next slide. This should be, and it is, a slide that shows the center theme of ACT Fund that we would like to promote, being an exclusive agri-fund, and that is regenerative agriculture. Now, we do this because regenerative agriculture is an alternative, or the alternative path away from conventional farming systems, which are often extractive, they deplete soils, and they're ultimately unsustainable. In recent years, there is mounting evidence that regenerative agriculture can increase resilience of farming systems and indeed increase productivity and ultimately increases farmer income. And it has welcome side effects on biodiversity and climate change. We will hear more from Fernando about it, but a few notes on this nevertheless from me. I myself went to agricultural college in the 90s, and there was no other concept taken serious but NPK agriculture with mandatory seasonal plowing, right? The full stop. Agroforestry, for example, one of the main agricultural practices for regenerative agriculture, was being considered inefficient, non-proven benefits, and really not taken serious as a farming system at all. And that is in sharp contrast, I think, as of today, we're much further. We know today that through live and healthy soils, plants can dramatically improve their performance through better nutrient and water uptake. And the build-up of organic matter is undisputedly considered today as a mandatory requirement for functioning nutrient and water storage capacity of the soil. And through the targeted SMEs, the ACT Fund will have access to thousands of those smallholders, and these can be assisted and incentivized to transition towards regenerative practices. For example, through offtake of additional crops from these SMEs, so these smallholders can open up their crop rotation and diversify their production. They can help establishment of carbon ticket schemes with planting trees and through the provision of shrubs and these tree seedlings, and obviously through training, farming practices, and also demo plots, just to name a few interventions. So this is all real. To give you an example, here at the CFC, we are invested in what has become one of the largest arable farms in Uganda for nearly 10 years now. They started the usual way with conventional fertilizer applications and regular plowing, conventional playbook. But over the years, they have completely stopped plowing. They leave all plant residues now on the field, and maize is now drilled directly in the soil. And they have also expanded their crop rotation, included sunflower, soya, and they are permanently experimenting with green manure intermediary plants. And last time we spoke to the farm manager when we visited the farm, they did mention that they still have issues with insect pest control, so they're still spraying, but they are, I would say, well on a transformative trajectory towards what is regenerative agriculture. And these are commercial farms. Yeah. Right, enough of this. We go to slide number 7, Andre, please. Yeah, as I have mentioned earlier, ActFund will make use of a TA facility. We aim at 10 million, and the TA facility will have a focus on interventions to support operations of the SME itself, and a focus on promotion on regenerative agricultural practices for smallholders. But of course, it will not stop there, but also address other constraints or opportunities spotted within the group of smallholders. Yeah, I hasten to say, but we are good at TA. Yeah? We have a 35-year history in the identification, development, and implementation of TA projects in agri-value chains. And as a service provider for other investment funds, we have implemented more than 100 TA projects over the last 12 years. So the ACT Fund will have access to a standing team in-house that is staffed with project management and agri-experts, and we have all processes in place so we can start TA basically on day one. Melanie will provide us with more insights on TA, just that much. It is our experience that the ability to provide targeted TA can really make a difference in a performance of an agri-investment fund. Yeah, if we move to the next slide. Yeah, to wrap up, I briefly introduced 2 ACT Fund pipeline deals that are basically ready to move. The first one is a coffee processor and trader in East Africa that is already firmly on its way towards regenerative agriculture. This is a locally owned company that saw the potential of Ugandan coffee early. We as the CFC already know that business for some time, and we were able to follow its growth path. And it's now at a stage where it requires a larger ticket size to further scale out its operations. So this company can graduate directly from the CFC portfolio over to the ACT Fund. There are more than 5,000 farmers which have so far been mobilized by the company and also organized. And these are actively encouraged to intercrop their coffee with shade trees and with food crops. And the company has a number of demo plots spread all over the region where the farmers are, and it provides free technical assistance, and that is not limited to coffee. And they are also experimenting a lot, make progress in what is called over-yielding. That is, you cultivate a mixed cropping system on a plot of land that might not necessarily lead to a decrease in the yield of the main crop, which you would do in monoculture, in this case coffee, but it actually provides complementary yields on top, from additional planted crops and also woody species on the same piece of land. And that is because of many things: less heat stress, less evaporation, increased soil organic matter, better nutrient availability, overall increased system resilience, as I've noted. And at the bottom line, it leads to more cash crop, more food crop, more fuel wood. So the payback for the company is that they have super loyal farmers and a high and reliable coffee productivity. Yeah, Andre, next slide. We're running out of time. This is second last. That's my last slide, I think. It's a cocoa grower, processor, and a trader in the Philippines with a large outgrower scheme. And the company is trying to restore the area where cocoa is grown on their own plantations and also on their outgrowers into an ecosystem where cocoa actually belongs, and that's forest. So the company has engaged in a large tree planting program for a couple of years now to establish multi-story agroforestry systems that actually mimic forest, where cocoa as an understory shaded forest tree can actually thrive as it should. Cocoa is a sensitive tree, hates wind, cannot manage heat stress, and has difficulties with direct sunlight. And so if you put canopy trees on top of it, that keeps all of it away. And the reward is higher yields and less disease. And on top of this program with the trees is certified and rewarded with carbon tickets. And at the same time, there is room for additional crops like bananas and vegetables which are being marketed through the company, actually. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's a final slide, brings me to an end of my presentation. I hope I was able to interest you for whatever reasons. Yeah, but please get in touch with us if you'd had an interest. Thank you, and back to you, Andre.
Thank you so much, Nicholas, for giving us it is a very brief introduction, enough to say that it took us almost 5 years to design the fund. And if you look into the finer details, then you will see that it is absolutely unique and probably the first of its kind in terms of involving an international organization and the door for private financing at the same time. Now I have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Fernando Russo, the founder and general manager of the Meraki Impact Funds, to tell us about the case for investment in regenerative agriculture. Fernando, please go ahead. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Andre. A pleasure to join you. And I've been following the development of the ACT Fund almost since the beginning, I think. And our story, we're a single family office coming from Brazil, but we headquarters in the Netherlands. And we decided to have regenerative agriculture as the core of our investment thesis. And the reason we did that was because environmental impact was the focus for the portfolio. And we discovered that for us, food systems is the biggest lever where we can achieve the environmental return that we want to see. And there's no way that we can decouple the environmental return from the social return. So we went from doing venture capital investments in technology that enables regenerative agriculture. So a lot of the monitoring technology that Lisa mentioned, the biostimulants, the biofertilizers, everything that AI is enabling us to accelerate now in biotechnology. But then realizing 5-6 years ago that only doing venture capital was not going to take us anywhere. And we really needed to get the money flowing on the hands of the farmers who could do the transformation on the ground. And then we divided our investment strategy into 2 buckets. One, it's really the land projects. So we started investing in large farm transformations, especially in Brazil. So as an example, we have a 14,000 hectares farm that we invested. That used to be degraded traditional cattle operation. Then soybeans was introduced, and then we created a system where the cattle, the soybeans, and the agroforestry component, they create something that is able to heal the soil and regenerate biodiversity. We're also involved with coffee, with agroforestry. Coffee and cacao is great that Nicola brought that as examples, because those are, for me, the 2 most exciting commodity crops that we have to push the transformation. In coffee and agroforestry, we see already that there's a huge correlation between doing agroforestry and adding all these service trees and service plants to the plantation, to the quality of the coffee and the resilience of the crop. So we're able to reduce the volatility that we see in our days, exacerbated by climate change, when we're able to do regenerative agriculture and add agroforestry in the coffee plantations in Brazil. And then the second bucket is all about debt finance, which is what CFC is tackling. And then it involves a lot the smallholder farmers that don't have access to the funding and everything that Lisa explained. So we really look at ways that we can get this money in the hands of the agroecological movements around the world. And this is always using debt and a mix of debt and equity. Like, we cannot just go and do venture capital in companies that are more the traditional food processing type of companies. And those are the ones that are most important in the transformation. So I recently had the privilege to go to Uganda. I was doing kind of a deep dive in Uganda to really understand food systems from the perspective of the ground there. And it was very interesting for me because it was a different perspective than the work I do in the more developed, sort to say, agri-power countries from the global south, like Brazil and Argentina, where, yes, we need to do a transition from conventional agriculture to regenerative agriculture. But you take examples of countries like Uganda, very often you see regenerative agriculture is the ancestral story, is the way they do agriculture for many millennia. And what we see right now is that commercial agriculture is stepping in. So in Uganda, you see the sugar industry stepping in and offering these offtake agreements to farmers with finance, with the support of the chemical industry, and tapping farmers in this wicked vortex of poverty, which is, here's the chemicals you need, you just apply this to the soil, you don't have to work very much, we guarantee the offtake agreement. But then when there's a climate event and the farmer loses harvest, the whole risk is still in the farmer. And then he ends up in the slums of Kampala. So I saw this with my own eyes. And I think what's the beautiful model of CFC, it's really finding the companies who are ready to buy complexity and who are ready to buy crops that can be grown in these traditional regenerative farm systems of Uganda that are very efficient to produce food. And as they do that, they are really also supporting with the resilience of soil health. And this is correlated with the water crisis and the way that we use water more efficient. And then the carbon is just another layer to it. So we tend to be very much fixed on carbon as the most important ecosystem services. But what's very exciting to me about regenerative agriculture is the prospect around biodiversity and water. And the interesting story about water is because water, it's something that any farmer understands. So if I have to talk to a conventional soy grower in Brazil, he understands that without water, he cannot produce anymore. So now all the climate disruptions we are having, it's making our conventional farmers more open to what regenerative agriculture can bring to the table from all different versions of it. So then going back to Uganda, when I was there with the CFC team, we visited a company that I think is a very interesting case study, Enimiro, which was originally a vanilla company. Vanilla is one of those beautiful crops, as is most of the spices, that has a very high value in European markets, in the global north, especially if it's grown organically, and it's something that you can add to a normal smallholder farm, very high productive in food, and you just add a cash crop to the system. And this really changes completely the life, the finance of that smallholder farmer. And what I loved about what I saw in Enimiro is that it went from being a vanilla company to really seeing that it could offtake other products from these regenerative, diverse systems that the same supply chain had. And then they could process other specialty crops. And then they started also buying the jackfruit from the same farmers, as they found an offtake agreement from a Dutch company that was willing to buy the jackfruit for the alternative protein products they have here in the Netherlands. So these are the type of companies that we need in the regenerative food systems transformation. Companies that buy complexity. Because if you start giving the message to your smallholder farm supply chain that you're going to buy complexity, you're not only going to buy coffee, but you're going to buy coffee, vanilla, jackfruit. You're going to help them sell their complexity. This is the incentive we need to have the social and environmental impact we need in the regenerative system. And then we start having farmers that are able to produce maybe half of the food they need to feed their family, and at the same time, 1 or 2 cash crops that they can sell to a processing company. So it's almost like a missing gap of companies that we need to address, and they are very abundant. And they are not the type of companies that can take traditional venture capital, because they're not things that we're going to hockey stick scalability scale. So I think there's a lack of understanding also in regenerative agriculture from the market. When I start seeing a lot of new funds stepping in, trying to do venture capital as the model of investment, as the Silicon Valley model should work in a place like Uganda or the Philippines or even Brazil, and the reality that it doesn't. So we have very few funds in the market today that are able to combine different financial instruments like equity and debt, mostly debt, to really be able to service these SMEs that play such a crucial role in the system. And that's why I got so excited about the ACT Fund when I first saw it, and I've been collaborating with them because they have so much knowledge on the social impact side of things and so much experience on financing these SMEs and smallholder farmers. How do we blend in the environmental impact, which is connected to that, and how are we able to monitor that as well? So this is how I've been engaging with them, and also trying to get more impact investors like ourselves excited about investing in the fund. That I think it's a very important vehicle that we need. So I'm going to stop right here, Andre.
Thank you so much, Fernando, also for keeping your intervention concise and very focused to the key message that for regenerative agriculture, we need to learn how to finance complexity, how to finance complex production systems that do address the problems of generating food for the family and income for the family at the same time and from the same natural resources. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now I do have the pleasure of inviting Ms. Melanie. I'm sorry, I haven't had much practice. Machingavuta, the Senior Director of Inclusive Investment at the TechnoServe, who will tell us about the impact capital as a strategic vehicle to support enterprise growth in the Global South and connecting to the technical assistance direction of the ACT Fund. Melanie, please go ahead, and I will pull up your presentation in just a second. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Andre, and thanks to the CFC team for the invitation to participate in this panel. As Andre mentioned, my name is Melanie Machingavuta. I oversee our inclusive investment team at TechnoServe, where we work with some of the most significant investors in emerging markets, agriculture in the Global South. We've been predominantly focused on Africa and Asia to date in this team, but as TechnoServe obviously operate globally across Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And we've really been focused on sort of driving inclusive and green growth in the sector. Today, I'm particularly pleased to talk about a model we've been testing for the past 6 years funded by UK International Development, called the Commercial Agriculture for Smallholders and Agribusiness, which is a technical assistance facility that is really squarely focused on the agenda of enhancing and unlocking more investment in the sector, and thought that this might be a helpful sort of tangible example for how technical assistance can really be a lever or enabler for flowing investment to the places where it's most needed. And obviously we'll touch a bit towards the end on where there are also potentially limitations of purely TA alone. So if we go to the next slide, similar to kind of a point Lisa made earlier, obviously, we firmly believe that the growth of the agricultural sector is critical to transforming emerging markets, but we continue to see obviously a gap and very limited proportion of private capital flowing to agriculture. And through the CASA Technical Assistance Facility, we've been very focused on, in particular, scaling financing in growth and climate adaptation and resilience. And we see that the same enablers or bottlenecks needed for growth, kind of there's an overlap between what's really needed for growth and adaptation. And I'll talk about that more as we go. So we've been working with a pool of investors to support businesses within their portfolios to grow whilst driving meaningful benefits for smallholders in their portfolios in a way that drives meaningful benefits in the form of increased incomes, productivity, resilience, and jobs. And increasingly, I think also supporting or sort of seeing the need to support businesses that are at an earlier stage or the first rung of the investment ladder to grow towards growing the kind of landscape of investable businesses, but importantly, the prevalence of kind of successful, profitable, inclusive agribusinesses that can flow in and drive meaningful investments into smallholders. Beyond the potential, obviously, as our North Star to drive meaningful benefits for smallholder households, and the millions of smallholder households which participate in the agricultural sector, you can't really talk about financing agribusinesses without talking about the investment flows to smallholders at the production level, right? So, and this is where most of the need is. So if you don't address the constraints and investment needed at the farm or production level, it's very hard to make agribusiness investments work. And we often see that agri investments underperforming where there isn't adequate investment flowing down to the farm or primary production level, which perpetuates this kind of cycle where investors are then less incentivized to invest in the sector. So really the core of our focus has been on strengthening inclusive business models with green and inclusive approaches, as you see on the slide here, in ways that are commercially sustainable and scalable, and obviously therefore generate the expected returns. And this is kind of a vehicle for then directly or indirectly influencing more investment in the sector. So if we jump to the next slide, just wanted to share a bit about how we practically do that. We establish partnerships with investors and then identify portfolio companies which have high potential for impact. And CFC is one example of an investor partner, but you see the kind of 15 to 20 investor partners we've supported over the years, and some examples on the left-hand side. And then are sort of working with businesses in their portfolios to define the business case for investing more meaningfully in smallholders, and expanding those models in a way that is commercially sustainable and scalable. So far we've worked with about 80 businesses across those 15 to 20 investor partnerships, and benefited 128,000 farmers in the form of increased productivity or climate resilience. And this is just to sort of give you a sense of the coverage, all with the intention of obviously increasing net incomes and resilience of those households, and importantly, whilst doing so, helping those businesses to grow and scale, and hopefully influencing how investors approach investment in the sector in future. We jump to the next slide. This is just to kind of capture the approach, I guess, and so sort of really see inclusive agribusiness models in this example as the kind of anchor solution. And so this has been kind of the heart of what we do, but adopting a kind of shared value approach to driving inclusive business growth. So we sort of the technical assistance is really focused on obviously defining the business case and building any kind of inclusive growth model on a strong commercial case, and essentially unlocking commercial value in the form of expanded margins or sales, so that they can so private sector can continue to sustain and scale any models that we promote and invest more deeply in farmers. At the same time, that obviously has to drive and generate meaningful benefits for the farmers, and there needs to be a strong business case there as well. So this is obviously critical in terms of the value that's then generated for farmer households in the form of obviously better prices, sales, increased sales, and increased volumes, etc. So that sort of underpins the model. And then if we jump to the next slide, I want to get into some of the trends that we're seeing. So after having worked with these businesses, we're obviously getting to a critical mass now where we can start to analyze the data set and start to see trends on both the commercial value and smallholder impact of different types of models. So there's some perhaps obvious points where you see, for example, that smallholder sourcing businesses, so essentially businesses that are buying crop back from smallholders, there's a high potential to drive quite deep income benefits for smallholder suppliers, where distributors and tech-enabled businesses have greater potential for scale, maybe at more modest impact. And then purely investing in more structured buying relationships or commercial extension and information provision tends to only get you so far. So meaningful for sort of obviously increases in productivity and quality, for example. But your real delta comes with investing in access to products or service on credit, for example. I guess stepping back a bit, underpinning some of this data that you're seeing on the chart here, some perhaps more interesting trends that aren't really sort of obvious by just looking at the chart is what it takes to actually influence inclusive agribusinesses to invest. And what we found in some of our analysis is that it would take it takes about 1.5 or 2 to 3 times potential ROI from a commercial performance or commercial value perspective to sufficiently incentivize a management team to invest in an inclusive business model. And that on the impact side, the benefits that are generated for smallholder households, where these are kind of models that are attractive enough for businesses to adopt, can be 3 to 4 times the amount that any public funder or donor invests. And that's in the form of obviously additional incremental income. So essentially $3 to $4 of additional net income for every dollar invested. But what you'll notice here is that very few businesses are currently in the top right-hand corner with deep and high scale of impact. And that's been driving some of the key questions for us around enablers to make that happen. And I'll try to touch on that. And some thoughts and questions maybe for the wider audience on the next two slides. So broadly, before we get to that, we've seen that technical assistance can help businesses to invest progressively in farmers, or at least technical assistance in this form, if you like, which is really focused on obviously flowing more investment to the farmer and the production level. And we're really on a journey, sort of often starting by supporting more structured buying relationships, and then investing in commercial and consistent extension or knowledge provision, and then that's all before expanding to kind of offering access to finance for growth and resilience, which often takes more risk, obviously is higher in capital intensity, but really, as I mentioned earlier, is where you see that really deep or higher impact per farmer. But harder to scale. That's obviously ultimately often what's making this big difference. And if we kind of move to the next slide, to summarize the kind of key message here, what we find is that even strong inclusive business cases require off balance sheet lending to scale, and at least and/or partnerships with third parties to really scale. And we've been obviously trying to figure out how do we address that the gap and move more businesses into that top right-hand corner, I guess, is our exam question. We think that obviously digitally enabled models that we've been supporting have a huge amount of potential here, but that sort of more creative forms of finance are fundamental to achieving kind of transformational impact at scale. And we sort of see an opportunity for technical assistance to work sort of much more hand in glove with innovative financing solutions. Obviously, we've been working very closely and collaborating alongside investments, but how do we kind of really work together to come up with products that can really address this gap? And I think it lies in kind of similar points that Lisa was making in aligning some of those incentives and for that investment to flow to smallholders. And then you can start thinking about, okay, how do you sort of really track that money is flowing effectively to that level? And does that make sort of some of these impact-linked concessional finance products easier to then deploy if you've got the proper incentives and the proper tracking systems to track that flow, if that makes sense? So essentially for that to happen, sort of thinking through the incentives that need to kind of be better aligned to flowing and tracking investment in meaningfully reaching the farmer and that primary agriculture level. And something that we're currently brainstorming and hoping to solve with our kind of broader investor ecosystem partners to try to take this to the next level. But hopefully that gives you some context on what we've been up to and where we see the potential for technical assistance to drive more investment into farmer productivity growth, as well as sort of adaptation and resilience. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Melanie. And thanks for pointing out to us how still the problem of achieving impact at scale still persists despite all the good efforts and all the funds deployed so far. Now, we have heard about the need for financing. We have heard about the design of impact funds, blending public and private financing. We have heard about the need to finance and the models to finance regenerative agriculture. And we heard about the use of technical assistance facilities to help that. And this all comes together at the level of a small and medium enterprise doing real things in the real world, in the real countries, addressing real issues related to commodities production and trades. And I'm very happy today that Mr. Dominic Kohlenberg, founder and chief executive officer of Organic Africa Limited from Zimbabwe, has agreed to join us today to say a few words about his experience in raising financing and in deploying and expanding his operations. Dominic, please go ahead. Please aim for 10 minutes also. Thank you. Dominic, I believe your microphone is muted. You need to unmute.
Thank you very much, Andre. Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. So let us introduce the practical case of Organic Africa, the case who we are, our history, and then the growth model and the financial needs for enterprises in development. We, Nikolaus had mentioned this already, are a value-based enterprise. We have three principles: good goods, good work, and good wealth. I think, Andre, that there are some slides. Can they be uploaded? Yeah. And we basically, these three goals, they are the same, or they are similar to social, economic, and environmental sustainability. If you can, thank you. Next. Next. We have had 18 years of experience here in Southern Africa. With these three principles, good goods, good work, good wealth, we focus on the rural poor here in Southern Africa. And we have now developed three different business units. This is baobab, rosella, hibiscus, and then indigenous oils. Our products are fair trade, organically certified, and they are sustainable and natural products. Our markets are here local, domestic markets, regional markets, but then export mainly US and the EU, but as well Asia. Next, please. When we started as an impact enterprise and value-based enterprise, we had to decide which products. We started with 8 different value chains: herbs, spices, grains, medical plants, carbon sequestration, food additives, cosmetic oils, and essential oils. All together, we worked with 63 different product lines to identify which ones have the highest positive social impact, which ones have the highest positive environmental impact into soil health and carbon sequestration, which ones have the highest positive economic impact on the small-scale farmers, the wild collectors, and of course, on us, as we are a for-profit business. To identify this, Fernando mentioned this, it's not easy because you can develop a product in a direction which has has positive environmental impact and positive social impact, even if in the beginning it did not. Next slide, please. So we worked a lot with a variety of wild collected indigenous underutilized products. Next slide. We developed a mobile distillation unit, the biggest one here in Southern Africa. And we, next slide, developed altogether more than 30 different crops which were on-farm, large-scale commercial products. After valuing all and assessing all of these 63 products, oops, if you can go back, please, thank you. All of this, well, next slide, please. 63 products, we now focus on 3. And these 3 products are, on the one hand, baobab, which has increased in international reputation enormously. Then our rural oil processing centers. So this is indigenous underutilized oil products. And then Rosella, hibiscus, which is, of course, you know, all of us have hibiscus tea in our kitchen shelf. It is the second biggest tea on earth and has not been produced here in Southern Africa. Next slide, please. Let me introduce to you one product line, baobab. Baobab is a superfood and is higher in vitamin C, 7 times higher than orange, has more kalium, calcium, iron than most other products, has more dietary fiber than any other food crop we know. And just last week, new research was published that it has a positive effect as well on fatty liver disease, etc. So this product is hugely important nowadays, and it's exploding in the international market. When we started it in 2008, we simply did one thing. We assessed what is there, and we realized that there are 5 million trees in the communal lands here in Zimbabwe, and they produce more than 1 million tons of fruit every year, which up to then simply rotted. Next slide. We then realized that this indigenous underutilized species is available all over, and we just need to develop it and bring it to the international market. Next slide. In 2009, we then introduced baobab, and this is one of the 63 different products I'm talking about, to the EU, and we got the novel food accepted. So in the end, in 2009, it was accepted as a food in Europe, and then in the US, in Switzerland, etc. And we could then start international trade. Before 2009, there was 0 international trade with baobab. Next slide. In 2009, we then produced the first bought the first 1.5 tons of baobab, and we realized it has a very positive effect on the social setting, because this product was there for the last 2 million years. However, now that it becomes valuable, the communities start valuing the tree, look after the tree. And we have bought the first 1.5 tons in 2009. Last year, it was more than 1,500 tons we bought with, next slide, working with more than 7,000, next slide, please, 7,000 wild collector families. Next slide, please. This product, as I mentioned, was not existent in 2008 on the international market. And now we have developed a full process cycle where we harvest the fruit, we process the fruit, we certify the area. Altogether, more than 200,000 hectares are organically certified. We then produce out of the byproduct, we produce biochar, bring this into compost, bring this into the soil, have produced this as a soil enhancer. We produce out of the byproduct the kernels. We produce oil for cosmetic industry and food for food additives, and mainly the local and regional and international market. Next slide. So here's some products made out of baobab. Next. There is more and more coming in Europe and North America. Next. And it is in all food sectors and cosmetic sectors. Next. Lisa mentioned that the cost of capital are, of course, the limiting factor for companies like ours, Organic Africa. We work mainly in Zimbabwe. More than 90% of our activities are not. More than 80% of our activities are still in Zimbabwe. And here, cost of capital. If we get a US dollar loan, the maximum is 3 years. The minimum is 18%, and it's 200% collateral. So when we go for the local currency, the maximum is 1 year. The minimum is 80%. 80, and it's again 200% collateral in form of title deeds. So this gives you an impression of what the environment we are in and where we have to grow to serve our clients. These are the rural poor. We work now in Zimbabwe, Malawi, Mozambique, and Lesotho. Next. We impact currently more than 13,000 families, and we have more than 200,000 hectares organically certified. So this is carbon sequestration on more than 200,000 hectares. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So, sorry, next. We, in the beginning, is 63 different products. This was in the end research we had to do because we are an impact enterprise. We need to identify what product is really the right product to serve the rural poor and give a financial benefit and give a social benefit and an environmental benefit. So this beginning means that we had to invest in research with our partners. And in the end, this is either risk capital or concessional capital or grant or equity or very long-term low interest financing. Once we have 3 years ago, we have decided that we go for these 3 different product lines where we work with. We then have to focus mainly on working capital. So these 3 different product lines have the social impact, the environment impact, and they are profitable for us and the small-scale farmers and wild collectors. When we work with small-scale farmers and wild collectors, we mainly need to focus on working capital because this is where money has to go. We can only collect products from wild collectors when we pay them because that is what we are there for. We can only collect, the rosella from our small-scale farmers, etc., and pay them immediately because this is where the impact or one major impact for the small-scale farmers is. There we have strong partners like Common Fund for Commodities and partners like our market partner and financial partner, Martin Bauer, for example, who we work with, one of the leading tea companies on earth. CapEx is the next. However, CapEx always depends on the industry. In our case, working capital are 2/3 of our needs and one third roughly is CapEx. In other industries, it can be different. However, for an impact enterprise, I mentioned where we stand on local lending, etc. Without partners like the Common Fund, without international partners, there is no realistic growth option for a company like ours with this huge potential we can see here and experience here in Southern Africa. Back to you, Andre.
Thank you so much, Dominic, for this experience from the real practice that the farmers simply need to get paid. They need to get paid on time access to capital is essential to make this possible. And it is up to the partners to make the suitable arrangements for the small and medium enterprise to receive the financing when they need and on the terms that they need. And the cost of capital remains where we started this meeting, remains a big problem for all the partners investing in small and medium enterprises. And we will now have the chance to circle back to the highest level problem. I would like to invite Mr. Igor Zelizetsky, BRICS Credit Rating Task Force leader, who will tell us about the magnitude of the blind spot that the global credit ratings have for developing countries and the global south. Igor, please go ahead.
Many thanks, Andrei. Am I audible? Yes, great. Such a distinguished panel, so it's a real honor to participate. Many thanks for inviting me. Very inspiring, but also eye-opening figures. Dominic, borrowing at 80% with 20% collateral, that is impressive by any stretch of imagination. As my former colleague at Moody's used to say, what could possibly go wrong with the interest rates like that? In my past life, I spent almost 14 years at Moody's. Right now, as Andrei mentioned, I'm focusing on the developing rating methodologies, rating package for within the BRICS environment, also Eurasian Economic Zone environment. Couple of words about the SMEs. I dealt with SMEs as part of my responsibilities at Moody's, in particular within the framework of SME securitization, where there are quite a lot of parallels with what Act structure provides, in particular subordination, and the element of pooling of SMEs in one portfolio. As I mentioned to Michael yesterday, we had a chat on the sideline of Sevilla conference. SME securitization is considered to be the most complex securitization asset class, using the rating agency lingo, because the SMEs are the most diverse asset class. They vary by industrial sectors. They vary by size. They vary by type of collateral, type of lending instruments, and so on and so forth. So projecting it within the framework of a rating is extremely difficult, but there are solutions, and I'm sure you are on the right path to develop larger and larger portfolios within Act fund structure, or future further developed solutions. As Lisa mentioned, the rating methodologies are extremely important, and within the BRICS framework, we focused particularly, we spent a lot of time developing the sovereign rating methodology, sovereign rating approach, because as you probably know, the sovereign rating sets the maximum achievable rating for any rated object within jurisdictions, or in other words, when the sovereign credit rating is downgraded, the whole jurisdiction is basically downgraded, depending on the ratings of the existing companies, banks, and so on. It's all going down, so the whole jurisdiction experiences sudden spike in the cost of borrowing, experiences refinancing difficulties, and so on and so forth. The work that we've been doing for 3 years produced methodology itself, and we set to produced methodology which is which has no political elements in it. It should not have had double standards of any kind, no geopolitical play, and we set for ourselves a goal to make it as affect the forward-looking analysis and forecasting, and that is reflected in the rating. As many of these elements should be statistically validated and rigorously tested with stress scenarios of various kinds and so on. And that's exactly what we've done. So, having this methodology and the model, which is quite a complex model, which is based or built on the sample of the data about the sovereign performance data provided by IMF, World Bank, the big three rating agencies. So this data is of about 172, 176 countries from 1996, where the data they began to collect it in an organized fashion until now. It gives us a sample of about 2,000 ratings, model ratings, and that sample is used in order to test the predictive ability of the model. And as I said, the results are actually quite impressive. So what it allowed us to do is to do comparative analysis and compare where the ratings should be based on the fundamentals of various countries, including the global South and African countries, and developed countries, and so on. What the rating should be, and where the ratings are based on the ratings of the big three. So, and then as an exercise for this presentation, I've compared a sample of about 11 countries, 11 African countries, and what it gives us on average the fact that the rating of, and they are relatively low rated countries, nevertheless it shows that the ratings are probably at about on average 2 notches below where it should be. How does it translate into the funding? It's about these 2 notches across the sample is about $351 billion. The amount of income, investment, and fiscal space these African countries lost last year. So it's a 1-year figure, and that is due to this 2-notch downgrade. $32 billion is the private capital European and other OECD investors failed to mobilize the same year because multilateral projects attracted only a fraction of the private money per public dollar. So this biased or not sufficiently precise ratings, they affect they sort of have a negative impact on both sides. They reduce the funding for the countries that needed it the most, and then they negatively affect the investor community and wide range of investors, from investors who could invest in the most safest, although less yielding senior tranches, as is the case in ACT, to the investors who have more aggressive investment strategies, and they want to invest in the junior tranches, which are more profitable. And when you get the rating right, when you get the analysis right, and you understand the proportion of the names in your portfolio that have higher probability of default, and if you understand what your recovery assumptions are, and that's another element which is quite critical for developed world. If you do get get it through the right prism, you have a competitive advantage. And I think this will hopefully translate into the practices used by the Act, by the Common Fund of Commodities, and by the Act structure itself. I realize that we're sort of running out of time, so I'm not going to go through the presentation as like for the full presentation as it was intended, but from my point of view as the kind of credit rating specialist who covered various asset classes from, as I said, the portfolios of small corporates to the sovereign risk. I believe that what ACT is offering, what you are proposing, marries first of all at the technical level several tools that increase efficiency of the whole exercise, and that's of course not to mention the virtually non-existent speculative component, which is the core driver in every other similar type of financial transaction, sort of in an open market space. Securitization, including the safest types such as cash flow CLOs and so on. They're good investments, but to a large extent, I mean, they do not have this positive angle of providing real money, real cash flow into the real economy sectors, and in addition to the countries that need them the most. And I actually learned quite a lot in the last hour and a half. Participation in the Seville conference really was a very rewarding exercise. The people you meet and so on, and even today, for the first time in my life, I heard terminology of vanilla investments being used not to indicate an investment which is so simple that it's vanilla. It's actually investment in vanilla, and that I think that's fantastic, and that's underscores the real life applicability of that fantastic work that all the participants of the panel are doing. So glad to be of assistance if I can in your future endeavors. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Igor, for this indication. Again, just to highlight that a habitual downgrade of 2 rating notches from a developing country, which every developing country is experiencing, is estimated to cost the developing country 51 billion per year in lost investment opportunities. And this is a number based on the currently available estimates that illustrates basically the magnitude of the gap in accessing the capital for the Global South. I believe we are slightly past our time, and I did ask for the questions to be posed in the chat box, but I think the discussion was so intense that the questions have not come up, I presume because everybody was busy listening. I would like to thank all the participants for the engagements. I would also hesitate to request all speakers that their presentations are authorized to be made available to all the participants of the meeting. We would like to circulate this to everybody who signed up for the meeting. Also, I understand, Igor, that you had a technical issue with your presentation, and therefore we did not get to see it. But please share it with us after the meeting so we can share it with the rest of the group. And otherwise, our doors, our email address, our telephone numbers remain open. Please do not hesitate to come back to the Common Fund for Commodities and to the ACT funds should you have any ideas or question regarding the opportunities that the ACT fund is offering for financing transformative agriculture. With that, I would like to propose to end this session. Thank you very much for participating, and I wish everybody a very nice afternoon and a very interesting continuation of the Finance for Development conference. Thank you. The meeting is concluded.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.